BHIM in itself, it was this neutral app. It was like the Switzerland of UPI apps.
Some of us just want payments. We don't want anything else.
Why is BHIM back now?
The NPCI had to bend over backwards to ensure that business continuity in the country was not affected.
This is exactly what happened to telecom in India.
So I think BHIM is scared of the big cats and the small cats are afraid of BHIM.
I'm going to begin today's episode of 2x2 by reading something, okay? And I'm going to see if one of my guests can recognize this. Okay, this is my reading, quoting voice, okay, Rahil? Quote, remember that epic cemetery scene in Sergio Leone's 1966 spaghetti western, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly? Something similar is at play in India's newest payments platform, Unified Payments Interface, bracket UPI, an app called BHIM. We'll come to it later. Stay with us. Another app called PhonePe, bracket owned by the largest local e-commerce unicorn Flipkart, and we'll come to that too, close bracket. And major banks are caught in a tense Mexican standoff with their made-in-India guns trained on each other. What a scene!
I am so glad that you read that out. What an introduction,
What
honestly.
a scene! I'm going to ask my first guest, Arundhati, do you recognize those lines?
Of course.
Okay.
It was my very first fintech story for the Ken in 2017. And that was when demonetization had just happened. And we were like, what hit us? And suddenly credit cards and debit cards were going out of fashion. And we were trying to grapple what this new animal called UPI was. And for a long time, we kept saying Unified Payments Interface /UPI. Now, luckily, we don't have to explain that. But very vividly, I remember that story.
For our listeners, that's Arundhati Ramanathan, Deputy Editor of the Ken, and also a long-term reporter of fintech in India. And as she said, she's been covering fintech for actually nearly a decade, because that story that I read was from 25th Jan 2017, published on the Ken, maybe like 3 months or 4 months after the Ken started in October 2016. It was her first fintech story. And you can tell just from what I had read, that scene that I basically read out, which was the opening lines of this story. And just after that is the next line, which sort of gives it away, which says, and I quote, "It has been just 5 months since UPI went live. And how did it come to this so soon, you ask?" So, tell us, Arundhati, this story, which was titled, do you remember the title of the story?
BHIM, the upsetter of plans.
Yes, the title of the story is The Unlikely Story of BHIM, the Upsetter of Plans. Why was BHIM so important? Do you remember?
Because it was something that the government was pushing and promoting. And as we know, all things government, we know how they are. But here it was actually a genuine contender to some of the very fledgling payment companies then, which was PhonePe, right? Which was garnering all this attention. And before even the banks could launch, before even PhonePe became the mammoth that we know that it is today, this was a true, genuine contender to PhonePe. And it was something that was whipped up in a matter of weeks. So it was genuinely something that deserved every bit of attention.
Very recently, the NPCI basically set up a goal that said, we want BHIM to basically go up and become within the top 5 of payment apps in India. I think they set goals saying that right now, even though it is 0.8% of transactions, our goal is that it should get to at least 5%. They've started pouring marketing into it. They started funding it like crazy. You can see ads of BHIM everywhere. And as everybody knows, the biggest sign that you have started to do something really big is they've gotten a brand ambassador. And the brand ambassador in this case is MS Dhoni, who is now the brand ambassador of BHIM. So it's a very interesting situation now. BHIM was there 10 years back, sort of disappeared. And now it's suddenly back again. We're trying to find out what really happened. Why did BHIM come back? And the answer, I suspect, like everything else, is the reasons why BHIM is back today has a lot to do with why BHIM was created and what it did earlier. in order to talk about BHIM today, I have a second guest with me. And my second guest is a returning guest on 2x2. Welcome, Abhishek Madan, to 2x2 once again.
Thanks, PGK. Very happy to be here as your fractional co-host, as we have discussed previously.
Okay.
And Arundhati, I didn't know that was your first story, and that's like that's like Rohit Sharma Test debut level first story.
we are in the cricketing analogies. Abhishek used to be VP of product at Paytm, where he looked at UPI, and he's come on this podcast multiple times because whenever we want to talk about UPI, whenever we want to understand what's happening with UPI, I always turn to Abhishek, and Abhishek comes on to make sense of what's going on. Abhishek, what are you doing these days? You're no longer with Paytm, but you're still a resident UPI expert because, as you can see, that just says a lot about UPI experts out there in India. But you can tell us what is going on, what's cooking at this point in time.
So PGK, at Paytm, we waged many wars, some intentional, some unintentional.
Arundhati wrote about some of them, I think. But okay, go on.
Yeah, I'm sure. And two of the people I waged a lot of war with, the three of us have been working together since I joined Insider back in 2017. So the three of us, me, Shreyas and Nihar, have started up a company called alt.inc, alt.inc. You can go to our domain. And we're cooking something up with AI, and I'm very excited to show it to all of you in a few weeks, maybe.
Nice. Another AI startup. It's not vibe coding, right?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Oh, wow. You've mastered the game of commenting.
Thanks.
No, we are really excited because whatever I know of Abhishek, and of course I've met Shreyas, who's also been on this podcast, I think that it must be something quite fun and quite interesting because I'm pretty sure it's not going to be something boring and middle of the road. I'm sure they're doing something really fun. So we look forward. But coming back to BHIM, because I'm pretty sure you're still a resident UPI expert, can you tell us a little bit about BHIM is back? Are you surprised that BHIM is back? Are you following the news?
Yeah, I have been following the news, and also I guess it's muscle memory now for me to have every possible UPI app out there on my phone. And BHIM's been giving me cashbacks on every third-party app, be it Swiggy, Zomato, etc. Even the bill payments on the app themselves are giving me 20-30 rupees off. I was speaking to a guy who heads product at a competing UPI app, and he was telling me, of course, BHIM is giving crazy cashbacks. That's where I pay my bills. So I think the industry is very aware of the push that's happening. And while I don't want to sort of, disclose too much right in the beginning, but I do think it has something to do with the Paytm crisis, with the duopoly of Google Pay and PhonePe. So I do think it's a very strategic push. The signs have always been there when they incorporated this new company, put in a new head. So I think, it's a very organic progression of the events of the last 12 or 14 months or so.
Interesting. We'll come to BHIM today, but I think I just want to go back to when did you join Paytm, Abhishek?
Well, technically, I joined Insider in 2017, and Paytm, my work started around 2020.
Okay, fair enough. So you've been around, you've seen this for a while. Arundhati, of course, like we've established, you've been covering this. So Arundhati, I'm going to come to you. When you wrote this story back in 2017 of BHIM, the unlikely story of BHIM, the upsetter of plans, what was the unlikely part of it? And what plans did it really upset?
It's unlikely because I don't think they expected or had the desire or vision to launch an UPI app. UPI, I mean, if you go back in history, it was Raghuram Rajan who had kind of been a proponent of it, and then there were a bunch of guys, the iSprit India Stack guys, who were like popularizing it, evangelizing it, and there were companies like PhonePe which were just adopting it. It had still not found its moment, but demonetization happened, and we all quickly needed, when cash was out of the window, you quickly needed digital options. And it was the perfect timing for this nascent digital payment system, right? And there was really just PhonePe, which was kind of in the thick of things. Banks were being nudged, being, almost like given an ultimatum to launch their own apps, but they were really not doing much with it. And the government badly needed an alternative to promote UPI, and they couldn't put their money behind, say, or their weight behind, say, PhonePe, or even promote any of the bank's app, because that would be like choosing. So they needed non-biased app that they could promote. And that's how BHIM came into the picture. So the folks at JustPay were tasked with building this app. And it was built, I think, within 2 weeks or something like that, if I recall correctly. And the Prime Minister then backed this. And it got incredible momentum as soon as Narendra Modi backed the app. I think within some 10 days, there were like some 10 million downloads or something like that, rivaling what PhonePe did. So that was the unlikely journey into which it came into being.
So if I had to really, like, I read your story, okay, yesterday, and it's actually such a fantastic story because what happened was, if you just go back, and the sequence of events now are quite interesting. Demonetization happens. Actually, to be fair, even before demonetization, they had launched UPI. They said, oh, here is this new way to do payments. And the reason why they came up with this new way to do payments was because they said, oh, all of this stuff about IMPS and, what is the other one? NEFT. You have to put bank details. You have to wait for like 48 hours for it to get approved. What is this? So what happens is that was the only way to spend, send money to anybody other than just hand cash to some people, right? So UPI comes, and when UPI comes, they had some time where they were like, oh, this is this cute thing, let's play with it. I think they did like a couple of hackathons. PhonePe, the company, sort of like tried to do it as a very small startup. And then, of course, as you said, demonetization happens. And then they realize, oh, wait a minute, this is now going to become, we need cashless. We have this thing with us. And you're correct. They wanted the banks to do it. But the reason why the banks did not really jump on UPI was because in some senses, it was going to cannibalize their own existing product. Because what happens is banks take a cut whenever you use any of their bank transfer products, which are anyway not great products like NEFT, IMPS. So now here is this other product that comes along and you're telling and nudging banks saying, hey, create an app, make sure your app has UPI, make sure your app has UPI. Number one, banks are not technologically savvy. So it's not like they have tech teams who can do this. Second, it sort of like undercuts their own business model. So you can understand why they drag their feet on basically to decide not to do it. So then what happens is they badly need an app. Now, you're right, for reasons they didn't want to go and back, like they didn't want to say, okay, PhonePe is the one because it's a private company, etc. So the NPCI went to JustPay and said, hey, can you spin up this app for us just so that we can demonstrate this thing? And the minute we can demonstrate it and put it out there, then what happens is because it is interoperable, it doesn't matter if the banks do it or not. Because now what's going to happen is anybody with, say, if I have an HDFC account, I will use the BHIM app and I will send it to, say, Rahil, who has an Axis Bank account using BHIM. And so the losers over here are technically HDFC and Axis, who could have owned that transaction, but they didn't, and they lose out. So in a way, it's also a nice lesson to the banks as well. And I think they wanted to do this so quickly, and they did. And I think by the deadline was we had to do it so quickly so that we can come and announce it, as you said. So by end of December, I think it was in your story you mentioned 30th December, like the Prime Minister essentially comes on television and says, use BHIM and this is the one, we back it, this is the one that we have, right? So that was the reason why BHIM was created. It was this demonstrator to say, let's kick this avalanche down and start it. And now everybody else started running towards it. So then, of course, the PhonePays, the Google Pays, the Paytms of the world, all of them went there.
But for context, at that point, was BHIM meant to be anything more than just the example? Like, was there an end goal with BHIM? Like, the end goal was we will phase it out and create this ecosystem of...
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. Yeah. I don't know if
Abhishek
or
I remember it very clearly. I was speaking with a source and they said very clearly that this is only meant to be an example and it will be sunsetted. Right? So, which is why and they kind of stuck to that, right? You didn't hear of BHIM as much after, say, Google Pay and Paytm really got into it. But I'm sure Abhishek here will have a better view of that. But that's what sources indicated back then.
No, you're completely right, Arundhati. I think even from the way the app operated, you could tell that it's supposed to be an example for this ecosystem of apps.
How do you say that?
Many ways. So just before we start, I want to give one shout out.
Yes.
You know how everybody talks about Baba Cycle and then someone will come and say there was Apache Indian in the 90s. So like that, just like UPI, there was a niche player called MMID. Which was, I think, mobile membership identifier or something of that sort, which was IMPS with a mobile number. I forget what the second M was for, and that was a precursor to UPI. And the rest of it was similar. You had to put in an MPIN. And I know this because a bank that I used to work for chose not to build this because it was so old, but the regulators would constantly be like, hey, you should be building this. So shout out to MMID, the pre-UPI UPI. But coming back to what I was talking about, I think the UPI ecosystem is very complex in many ways. Firstly, you have the RBI that imagines a future for the country, and you have the NPCI that figures out how that future might play out. What ecosystem or market dynamics can it orchestrate for such a future to play out? And then there are these apps that are like, if NPCI wants to do this, this is the best way to present it to a customer. And there's a lot of disagreement in the ecosystem because there's different power that each app wields, right? Obviously, basis the distribution of users. And in many ways, BHIM is sort of that NPCI's attempt to say, this is how we're imagining it, or this is how you should comply. It's not always a feature for the customer, it's also a safety net. So often the NPCI is like, I want you to build this safety net. And all the apps are like, hey, I don't know how this will happen. And they build it on BHIM so that you can use it. Even today, there's this UPI circle feature, which some apps were very bullish on, some apps have not released. BHIM, I think, has the most advanced version of that feature.
If I'm not wrong, UPI circle, I'm testing my memory, okay? Because I wrote about this once. UPI circle is if you can have like a group of people, like your family or something, and they
Correct.
can pay from the same account without needing a PIN,
That's
or you put a PIN on their behalf or something like that.
Absolutely. Those are the exact two pathways.
Hey,
When
nice.
I downloaded BHIM this morning, that was one thing I saw on the homepage right on top, in fact. It's like one of the very prominent features when you look at the app.
That's right.
And that was
Yeah.
again, I think, piloted on BHIM, or at least BHIM basically put it out and said, we believe in this, we are going to.
I think a couple of other players were very bullish on it and have released it. But it's like, again, if I were to give a cricket reference, a lot of people in this room are people who grew up, then the IPL happened, and then IPL was this tournament that happens. It wasn't be all and end all of cricket. Like, I'm sure the EPL was not the be all and end all of English football at some point in time. But if you are born in, my son was born 2 months ago. So when he grows up, for him, IPL is like this annual cricket bonanza that is like set in stone. And for many kids now, UPI is exactly like that. Correct. It's the primary way of paying. Like MMID, IMPS, NEFT are all random things.
Yeah,
So
I thought you guys sent money via pigeon before UPI became a thing. So yeah, really mind-blowing stuff.
We came close.
So when Praveen and I used to go to college, he would buy cigarettes for me and I would give him rice in return.
You're giving too much away. Okay, your son is going to listen to this someday. But no, go on.
Right.
So
Right. So I think there has to be this universe of features that we build to bring the 14-year-old or the 16-year-old or the 18-year-old into the UPI fold the day they have a bank account or even before that. And this is what the RBI is thinking, obviously. And this is what the NPCI is thinking. And they're thinking, hey, where do I build this? I build this on BHIM. So this is the larger, ecosystem thought. And I think BHIM is a great example of execution on that ecosystem thought.
yeah, I'm trying to think of an analogy of like, I'm sure there are examples of like, say, platform companies, right? Who essentially are like, this is the way to do it on our platform. And of course, all the players sort of like figure it out. Okay, is it this way? Is it that way? But the platform has sort of like a player in the mix and says, okay, look, we have done this, and this is the way to do it. I'm assuming it's something like that. So that others sort of get a little bit of FOMO, a little bit of, oh, this is how to do it. And then they go ahead and do it.
Yeah, it's a fair analogy. I think like the last time we met about JustPay, I think they were in a similar place where JustPay powers payment aggregators and we're building a
That's
payment
right.
aggregator of their own.
That is correct.
So
Yes. Payment aggregator.
this has happened, but it's been far more controversial.
Interesting. Fair. So I think the first thing that I observe is that when they did all of this, I'm assuming, I think the question for all of you is that, did it work? Did it achieve what it's intended to? I mean, before we come to what happened to BHIM now, I'm saying that from the period of 2017 all the way to 2022, if I look at numbers of, say, UPI apps and how UPI has grown in India, one could argue that, the people, whoever was in charge of it must have gotten a promotion. They did exactly what they were supposed to do and kind of worked, isn't it?
It did. I think the fact that BHIM faded into the background was by design, right? And as Abhishek said, you want to just show that as an example to show others how they could be done, or nudge others into saying that, hey, if NPCI with such few resources can do this, why can't you, right? So it's I think that way it stuck to the script.
Abhishek, is that your point of view as well, that it went up to a certain point and kind of stopped?
I do think so. What I'll add is that there has always been a BHIM kind of UPI user. BHIM in itself, while we've been discussing what it stands for the NPCI or for the ecosystem of other apps, it also stands for something for an end customer, even if it was just a million or 10 million or 20 million people. It stands for this. It was this neutral app. It was like the Switzerland of UPI apps, which isn't super influenced by, hey, I have an investor which got sold to Walmart, or I have an investor that may not be from India, and all of these things. The other apps have so many dynamics inside them. But BHIM was this homegrown, uninfluenced, not worried about cashback, not trying to fool you into get a loan, none of this stuff. So a lot of people used BHIM from that perspective as consumers. And I would be interested to know how they feel now. Because as BHIM has become more and more like the others, it has become more like the others in many ways.
So I have a question. So if I was a consumer, I mean, forget about today for a second. Let's say maybe like 2 years back. If I opened the BHIM app, are you saying that I wouldn't get upsold on loans or any of these other services?
You wouldn't.
No.
What I found annoying is that you would get upsold every single UPI feature. So if BHIM released UPI Lite, every time you open the app, BHIM will be like, "Arey, use UPI Lite? You're paying 10 rupees. Why are you using UPI? Use UPI Lite." So that annoyance was there. But that seems like a more innocent annoyance than, hey, take this loan from such and such loan provider. So that upsell did not happen. This check your credit score. Every UPI app is like, hey, check your credit score. Correct. BHIM was like, no, man, just spend money. I don't care.
In fact, on that note, what I noticed this morning is, for a weird reason, like my PhonePe app stopped working, just working. Like I was making an important payment. My 1.5-year-old was just wailing at the hospital and at this pharmacy. I had to make a payment, and my PhonePe app just wouldn't open. And that really annoyed me at that point, right? Like, it has one job, and when you can't do that, it's annoying.
I mean, PhonePe would disagree and say we have other jobs and you're not doing any of them. But sure, let's go on. I think I'll just point out, Arundhati, that you've been fairly prescient about this. Again, I go back to your story, right? And I'm quoting the last part, which is, quote, "Which so much having gone into the creation of BHIM, what if suddenly the plug was pulled out of BHIM? As remote as it may seem, BHIM, which is expected to have 100 million users this year, may not exist in its current form by the end of the year." And you're quoting a senior official who says, "BHIM will encourage users to move on within the end of this year." The official in an email requested that neither he and his organization be identified. He did not give more details how that would transpire. But you also say, I mean, later in the story, it comes that the co-founder of a payments company also sees this happening, because he says, quote, "NPCI is not in the job of running and maintaining an app. It is not in the business of handling customer grievances." And then at that point in time, it was like you basically tell in the story that as good an app as it is today, it has unintentionally pulled a gun on all the stakeholders of this very nascent ecosystem. Basically, you have started this off. You have like, the race has begun now, and now BHIM is now going to retreat into the background. So it was pretty clear that they were going to do that. I guess the question that I have for the two of you is, you're all arguing that it sort of like did its job. Now I'm going to push back and ask, did it? Because I expect that one of the things that I think they anticipated by doing BHIM was, they thought, look, we're going to create this ecosystem of all of these payment apps that's going to come. They're going to be like 10, 15 of them. And they're all going to be in like having their own kind of consumer use cases, own kind of little niches. And it's going to be this thing where they're all going to fight among themselves. Some market share up, some market share down. And that did not happen. And as the years went by, one by one, people just got, well, let's just say, they just got taken down, right? For different places for different reasons. And I'm going to give 3 examples. Example number 1, WhatsApp. WhatsApp was supposed to have UPI like quite early on. They were ready. But there was a lot of like feet dragging on UPI for WhatsApp because the existing players were very nervous about what happens when WhatsApp gets UPI. Because from their perspective, it was like the minute WhatsApp gets UPI, the game is over. They're going to win completely outright. In fact, that was the narrative. So please don't give WhatsApp UPI. And they had many reasons for doing that. Then, of course, they slowly scaled it up and said, oh, we're going to give you 3%. We're going to give you 5%. You're capped at this many million. And quite frankly, I think, if I'm not wrong, recently or within the last few years, I don't think there are any restrictions or anything, but doesn't matter anymore because WhatsApp is now a fringe player, right? The second company that sort of got into this was Paytm, and we've spoken about Paytm as well. And Arundhati has written about some of the problems that Paytm went through a few years back. They had some problems with licenses. We don't want to go too deep into it, but suffice to say that at that point in time, they lost a big share of UPI. They had a pretty big share of UPI, and now that has fallen down, and one could argue they're still recovering from that. I don't know if Navi counts, but I know that Navi also tried to get licenses in, but I know that they're also one of the players in the UPI side, so one could argue maybe Navi is there on the side as well. So now if you look at this, what's really happening is they wanted to create this big ecosystem of all of these UPI companies, and now what has happened is, for many reasons, mostly regulatory, you have down to two. And now Google Pay and PhonePe practically have over 80% of the market share in UPI. The NPCI in, if I'm not wrong, 2020, 2021, put a market cap and said that no UPI player can have more than 30%, but they have postponed the implementation of that twice because they know that they cannot implement it. So here is my point, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the analogy that I'm really proud of making, which is that BHIM is essentially, can't you see what this is? The analogy is very, very clear. This is exactly what happened to telecom in India. When telecom came, there were all of these players. There were the Aircels, the Airtels, the Jios, and everyone came. Then finally they thought, oh, everybody's going to be great. We're going to have so many telecom players. Everybody gets, culled for many reasons. And finally you're down to two. And so now the government of India is desperate trying to prop up, Vodafone Idea. And of course, trying to make sure that BSNL works because they have that stake. So here's my point. BSNL and BHIM sort of are very similar now, right? Of course, BSNL is like a PSU. That's a slightly different thing. But I feel like it's the same thing. This is the government putting its sovereign stamp on something to say, we need to be in this game ourselves with a player of our own in order to influence what's going on.
The analogy makes sense. I would take it one step further and say that probably BHIM looks better than BSNL because of its parent, which is NPCI. Because NPCI has proven that if it really wants to give advantages to its own products, it can. It has shown this with various other products where, let's take RuPay, for instance, right, which is our sovereign debit card / credit card alternative to Visa and Master. RuPay has tried really hard to gain market share. It got to about 10% in 24. Let's face it, right? Visa and MasterCard are superior products, acceptances everywhere. But Visa, I remember bankers telling me that they were mandated to also issue RuPay cards. And until recently, it didn't have a big leg up, but NPCI decided to combine, take two of its products, which is UPI and RuPay, put them together and say that the only credit cards that can be linked on UPI are RuPay credit cards. And suddenly, boom, RuPay credit card transactions start growing, right? So you cannot underestimate what NPCI can do because it owns all these different sets of properties. So if it really wants to step up on market share, it possibly can.
I'm going to bring Abhishek in because, one thing that I must say is that Abhishek has very strong points of view on RuPay, especially. Each time I meet him, for a long time, whenever I'd meet him every few weeks. And the first thing, or one of the first few things he'd say in the conversation to me is do you have a RuPay credit card? I'm like, no. He's like, why don't you have a RuPay credit card? You should get a RuPay credit card. So I was like, okay, sorry, go on. Abhishek, tell us about BHIM.
My notes say Visa, MasterCard, superior? Question mark. Cross. So yes, Praveen, I'm still on my thoughts on RuPay are still the same. I think how American men wear a lot of khakis to work. But in India, wearing khakis is a terrible idea because it's dusty, like they get dirty very easily. Why would you wear khakis in India? For me, Visa and MasterCard are khakis in India. They're good to have, but if I can get 1% cashback while buying bananas, then why will I not get a RuPay credit card? Like I have one of the, like I have a Tata Neo card, which is very easy to get. So if you want to get one, PGK and Arundhati and Rahul, please.
Again, I want to
please
stress
get
that none of these people are sponsors. We don't have any sponsorships
they're
on
not.
2x2.
But
But go on.
I do think like so for example I play tennis with this guy who owns a few small factories. He's as in not factories, they're workshops that create certain chemicals. It's a small scale operation, and he has to pay 4 electricity bills, and he has a cash flow issue. And my point was like autopay on RuPay took some time to come. I don't even know if it's still here. But autopay on RuPay for his electricity bill, where the RBI has otherwise clamped down on recurring payments on credit card, is a beautiful solution. I mean, his cash flow is not hurt. He gets 1% cashback or whatever. So I do think like for many people in India, RuPay is a far better product than Visa and MasterCard, especially for a class of people that doesn't regularly spend 10,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees. Because at that point in time, obviously the major networks give you far bigger rewards, etc. So that one point I'll make and park it. The second point I want to make is we spoke about, you drew this analogy between UPI ecosystem and the telecom ecosystem. I just want to stress that UPI is a lot more than consumer apps. Consumer apps are a sliver of UPI, whereas BSNL and Airtel is literally most of telecom. I'm not very familiar with telecom, so I could be wrong. So there are banks, there are PGs, there are PAs, there's e-rupee, there is RuPay that we spoke of. There's like 10 products that they have. Even today, if you go to statistics on NPCI, you have to select one tab to get the number we're looking at. There are like 17 other tabs. So this sort of, maybe you can call it a failure, or this coalescing of market share has only happened in one of those categories. The other categories are relatively better than this, while there are still lopsided sharing of market share that side. And I want to briefly talk about, I should have gone in opposite order, but because of RuPay I got excited.
Okay, go on.
I think like WhatsApp's failure is two-pronged. And having been in a company that has externally failed at something, there will be two narratives. The first narrative will be inside the company, which will be like, hey, we were kneecapped by the regulator. We were betrayed by the other players. There will be this narrative, either in WhatsApp India or WhatsApp Global. But there is this other narrative, which as an external observer, I see that it's very difficult for human beings to use the same app for too many different things. It is just not possible, right? And therefore, if I would think of WhatsApp as my primary mode of communication, and I'm already on PhonePe or BHIM or Paytm or Google Pay for payments, for me to put those two together is a failing of the human mind, which product managers should understand, and which is why the super app kind of peters out in many attempts as well. But I'm just chronologically addressing everything you spoke of. I'm not making a larger point.
No, that's okay. I think the larger point, or the question that I have at this point is, and this is really the heart of, I mean, we've gotten here after like 35 minutes, but here is the thing, because all of this context was necessary to ask this question. Why is BHIM back now?
BHIM is back now because it wants a sovereign alternative. That's pretty much what Dilip Asbe, who runs NPCI, said.
One second. What is it? Who's it here?
NPCI.
NPCI. Okay, so the NPCI wants a sovereign alternative. Go on, please.
Right. So it has seen how market share has gotten lopsided. It has seen how, despite so many apps coming into, there are like 80 plus UPI apps, no one has really been able to take share. And it goes back to the RuPay, why RuPay came into being. They didn't want Visa and Master, American multinationals, to have full control of India's payment systems. Now, you can argue that Paytm has listed, PhonePe will eventually list, so their shareholding will eventually, it'll reflect, it won't be as American as it is for PhonePe. But still, it wants an alternative, right? And there aren't any other credible, I mean, you have numerous slew of UPI apps there, but everyone has their own kind of agenda. Everyone is trying to for everybody, payments is like a gateway to something else, right? And here is BHIM, which is saying that my other objectives are not being met. of going to tier 2, tier 3. Like, can we promote payments in rural areas? Can we promote UPI Circle? Can we promote UPI Lite? And so many other things which the ecosystem probably needs. Those are probably not aligned with what the other apps want to do, right? Those particular things that BHIM or NPCI wants to push are not aligned with what other payment companies want to do. So it wants a vehicle which will fulfill its own priorities.
Once again, I want to take those three things apart, but I'll just throw it to Abhishek first. And Abhishek, do you have a point of view on why BHIM is back?
Yes, definitely. Firstly, I think RBI has used these two words very often: concentration risk. If you were to read NPCI circulars, and often when the governor speaks, they worry about concentration risk, that two players own large amounts of market share. And that's not true in banking, for example, right? So therefore, there is an obvious concentration risk for what is a fundamental utility to move money in India today. Secondly, NPCI has taken a lot of steps to break this concentration risk. I once in the NPCI office, I walked into a boardroom full of people and I was shooed out because it was only for small UPI players. And I used to work for Paytm at the time. So it was everyone who's under, who's the longer tail of UPI. And it was the NPCI hosting them and helping them to gain market share and say, hey, what can we do to improve your situation? So they take attempts to fix that. So RBI is saying, hey, concentration risk. NPCI is saying, I will talk to these people and figure it out. And then there is this crazy breakage with Paytm in January 24. Again, obviously, my telling of things is colored by the fact that I was in the eye of the storm. But there is this crazy breakage of what is a player with massive market share in FASTag, with massive market share as a payments bank, while routing 1 in 3 transactions touch that server, right? So it's massive market share. And there's about 15-18% of consumer market share as well. And when that broke, the NPCI had to bend over backwards to ensure that business continuity in the country was not affected, right? They had to go, bargain on stuff with either party, either RBI or Paytm, that, hey, can we fix it this way? Can we not do this? Can we do that? Why? Because they can't tell you, go use PhonePe. Like, they can't make that claim. PhonePe is a private player. Other players will be like, hey, why don't you tell the people to use my solution? So BHIM requires, or rather NPCI requires, a very strong participant in this ecosystem, which is there in case something fails catastrophically. So while NPCI is trying to fix concentration risk by tweaking market dynamics, it requires an insurance policy where if something goes terribly wrong, catastrophically wrong, they have a state-sponsored, NPCI-sponsored solution to problems, and people can be sent there. So that's I feel this is the genesis of some thought in the NPCI. I could be wrong about it, but there's a wild claim.
Got it. Interesting. Okay. So I get the two of you. I'm just going to distill it a little bit. Okay. So Abhishek, your point is well made. You're basically talking about concentration risk and the need to have a player in the middle for all of these reasons as an insurance policy. Get it. I'm going to go to, I think that I understand in theory, and I don't think I can poke too many holes in it personally. Okay, fair. I understand. I think for Arundhati's point, I'm just going to push it a little bit. So first was we spoke about, or you mentioned, Arundhati, about, say, the need to be a sovereign. This word sovereign now has started coming up a lot in the last 12 months, right? And one can see why. I mean, it's across from AI to telecom to, of course, now, and payments as well. Why does this matter suddenly? Why does sovereignty matter so much? I mean, the reason I ask this question is because isn't the UPI itself sovereign? Isn't the NPCI sovereign? Isn't the RBI sovereign? I mean, these are all sovereign anyway. Why do you need an app at the very end to be sovereign? Other than the reasons that Abhishek listed out, which I understand. Is there any other reason?
Because when I think sovereign is another word for, you're not controlled by, say, shareholder interests of, say, in the case of PhonePe or Walmart or anybody else, right? You're not guided by what those shareholders' interests are in how a particular app's payment company's business develops. Here, you're putting the country's interests first in promoting this app. I think that's where the sovereignty angle comes, which is where the whole, can we push UPI to tier 4, tier 5 cities?
Okay, great. That's the second point.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'll come to that. Now, I think that is another point that you made, which you're right. I think they've also kind of like alluded to this, right? Where they're saying that, the other reason why we need to have BHIM is because, well, if you really look at UPI transactions in India, I wouldn't say they're flatlined, but they're kind of like plateauing, I think. Okay.
Correct.
And I don't think that's I don't think I can blame it on any individual party, but I'm just saying it's happening. Look, how many people are going to make payments in India? There is a certain limit, and I think it's plateauing. Clearly, the NPCI believes that there is upside to be there. There is something. There are people who still want to make payments, but for whatever reason, none of these apps are, getting to them. They're either through marketing or whatever incentives. I don't know what that is. We'll come to that. So hence we have to do something. I don't know, Abhishek. What is your point of view? I don't know. I'm just more skeptical about this. I feel like really.
I can think of both sides of the argument.
Okay.
And firstly, I do think that most mainstream UPI apps apply this lens of, is this user monetizable?
Okay.
Because like most consumer products, you have a certain part of the product that is used to acquire a customer and a certain part of the product that's used to monetize the customer. Payments, UPI payments, consumer payments, P2P, P2M, whatever, is the acquisition point. And then everything else is the monetization point.
Sure.
Merchant, of course, is a separate topic. I'm not talking about merchants. So I do think that business teams at large apps would look at someone who's in a tier 4 or tier 5 town. Again, I don't know what that means, but I'm assuming some small village in India, and sees very little hope to earn money out of this person, right? And they're already sitting at 100 million monthly users. Like, fine, I'll go to 150 million or 200 million. But what really matters now is how much money am I making of these people. So I see that argument completely for a consumer app. The other thing I'll add is that the NPCI is, after all, a consortium of banks.
Correct.
And banks are always in search of the unbanked. Because when you find someone who's unbanked, you get to open a new account. And when you open a new account and put money in it, then your entire cycle kicks off. It's far more valuable than 10 transactions done in a month, right? There's no comparison because someone's given you 100 rupees. 10 transactions, probably 25 paise or 30 paise or something of that sort. So there is definitely NPCI's interest in finding more unbanked people and banking them for the members of the consortium as well. So I do think that makes sense.
I get it. If I had to bat in favor of, using a lot of cricket analogies today, IPL is starting this weekend. I think that's why. Okay, anyway, if I had to bat in favor of the UPI apps, let's call the UPI apps for a second, right? If you take the example of, say, I can imagine a PhonePe or even a Paytm for that matter arguing that, what more do you want us to do? Like, in the sense that, look at the amount that we are spending in terms of marketing, branding, cashbacks, and we have gone all out to get these users. As an example, again, it's just a coincidence we're talking like the day before the IPL starts. But if you look at, say, last year's IPL, I remember PhonePe very aggressively advertising, right?
Yeah.
And that is like prime media property that one could argue is going to be seen all the way down to like tier 3, tier 4, whatever, right? So they're doing their best to get those users, and for whatever reason, I don't know, I feel like they've gotten whoever they can get, no? But you also...
The PhonePe was one strong independent woman in a city. That's not going to affect tier 5. Like, some guy in tier 5 is going, I will not use this app. This woman is too independent. So I don't think the creative was really made for those people.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I'm not going to get into the
and I don't think NPCI is also asking them that, why aren't you going and putting any mandate on them, saying like say banks have public sector, priority sector lending norms and things like that. I don't think they're going and saying go and cater to them. That's why it's doing it by itself.
So Arundhati made 2 points of sovereignty and tier and these unbanked people. I think sovereignty is a bit of a dog whistle. I don't think it's sovereignty from foreign actors. It is sovereignty from private players. Really, that's what we mean. It's independence for the NPCI to function as they and the RBI wish. And that has value. Like, they're fully within their rights to do that. I just think sovereignty is mildly icing on an otherwise different cake.
Okay, fair enough. But you're also making the argument on behalf of you say you could see it on both sides, Abhishek. The other side is from the perspective of these apps.
Which is that, like, on both points, like, you want sovereignty, fine, but UPI has been made by these people, these 3 or 4 or 5 big apps. Like, you watch any cricket reference, but any highlight of a tournament played in India, the stumps will say Paytm. right? Almost every great innings, the stumps will say Paytm. What more? That's the most expensive sponsorship you could go for. So they've gone out all guns blazing. They've done everything from a ecosystem growth perspective. And this independence that they want, like the parent wants independence from the child, is a little, the child will go like, fine, do whatever. That's kind of funny. And even tier 3, tier 4, like, it's the job of the NPCI to create market dynamics that creates behavior that they want. And they need to create market dynamics that help these large apps to go to these smaller places and acquire users, right? If those market dynamics don't exist, why is UPI payments a customer acquisition feature and not a customer monetization feature? Because there's no money in it, right? So like there is some failure, again, not intentional, but over time there is some failure, and therefore I see the perspective of the private players as well.
Got it. So
it's therefore in a position of its own making, therefore, right?
Absolutely.
It has not incentivized people to go to tier 4, tier 5, and therefore it's having to step in by itself. It meaning NPCI.
Suffering from success.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay, so here's my question. So let's say, for instance, now, for all of these reasons, now NPCI, RBI, etc., banks say, okay, fine, we need BHIM. BHIM has to come back for some of these reasons, right? What can they do? I guess that's my real question. Like, what can they do?
NPCI coming, I mean, with BHIM coming, I don't think it's going to make a big change in the lives of, say, PhonePe or Paytm or Google Pay, but it's more the long tail who probably have to kind of be wary of this, like Cred, Navi, Supermoney, Kiwi, and these thousands of, hundreds of other apps that are hoping that payments will be their gateway to sell all these other products. It's probably them that
I'm going to contest.
No,
I understand, Arundhati, but I'm going to contest that. Why? Why would Cred care? Think about it.
Yeah, they have their users, right? I'm just talking in terms of market share. Cred will have its niche set of users, right? Everybody is... The thing is, BHIM is also now exhibiting the characteristics of all these other apps, like, say, Cashback, right? It is trying to play the game of the big players. So, which is the concerning part?
No, it's not the concerning part. I think the part that I'm basically trying to say is that, and this is the question that I asked, like when I asked what can BHIM do, I think the answer to that is, well, BHIM has to do what everyone else did, right? Is there anything else that BHIM can do? Is the answer that, well, I guess now the government of India has to write a check to BHIM to say, okay, this much cashbacks you can give this year, and please allocate this cashbacks in such a way that you get tier 4, tier 5 customers. I don't know how they'll do that. But
no, as I was discussing, no, they could, if they really want to put their weight behind BHIM, it can do what it did with RuPay. It can do what it did with Bharat QR code. If you remember, there was this product called Bharat QR, which Visa brought in. It could accept payments from both cards and UPI. But NPCI was like, no, we don't want this product. We want UPI QR code, which can accept payments only from UPI to be promoted, right? So it kind of killed that product made by Visa. So it can do those things. If it really wants to push BHIM, the fact that it owns UPI and it also has a player in the running, that is the part that should make others uncomfortable.
Okay, fair enough. Now we'll come to that. Okay, so there are two parts. Okay, I guess, or I'm guessing it's going to be a combination of two. Let's start with cashbacks for a second, because I guess it seems like that's the most obvious weapon, right?
Suppose I just got notification for BHIM cashback. While you said BHIM cashback, I got 20 rupees cashback if I send 20 rupees.
They are listening. Wow. Okay, they know this is happening. Anyway, so question for, I guess, you also, Abhishek, which is that let's talk about cashbacks for a second. I know we can talk about other kinds of access and through which you can do things like what Arundhati alluded. We'll come to that. But let's talk about cashbacks first. Is that the most potent weapon? Does that weapon even work?
Yeah, it's kind of like...
Clearly it works on you because you just got it. But other than that, go on. Huh?
No, that's true. I think there is there are different kinds of UPI users. There are UPI users that are dating apps. Then there are UPI users that marry apps. It's that kind of thing, And the dating apps users, or rather the users who are dating UPI apps, they're just looking for cashback. And they're happy to jump ship every other day. And there's this transient, it's probably like a young crowd, doesn't have too much money. 20 rupees matters to them. and they're jumping ship from every app to every other app. And what happens is that every time a new app comes, the incumbents are like, yeah, we just finished fighting this war. Now again, the new spring chicken is going to give cashback, and now I have to lose hemorrhage market share to this person.
Correct.
Or I also have to spend money.
Correct.
So now BHIM is a new entrant in that. What I will add, I do think cashbacks are necessary to kick the journey off. You get people to sample your product. Like any payment product, UPI has many hops. The requests go through 5 or 6 or 7 servers. Things can go wrong. Your payments can fail. You need to benchmark yourself. Spend money. Figure out how well your product is doing. Figure out hooks, etc. I think eventually, and I've kind of changed my view on this since I was working in UPI. I think every app has a fundamental, after the cashback phase, every app has some fundamental proposition, or it appeals to a certain demographic. Paytm appeals to people in the north. Google Pay appeals to a metro living, Google adjacent kind of person, which is why PhonePe's ads were what they were. In fact, they were very metro adjacent because they wanted to appeal to that crowd. I think BHIM has to figure out who they appeal to and what is a kosher way to advertise to those people. Because if, like earlier I was saying, BHIM is seen as this independent Switzerland of UPI apps, but BHIM can't advertise that because that's like NPCI coming in saying, all my other ecosystem people are bad. I am good. Come
Exactly.
use my app. So that's really BHIM's problem is what can NPCI say and what do their consumers agree with or are attracted to, and how do I really turn that up? I think
And
that's
can
for them to figure out.
NPCI maintain its neutrality with having a player like this, right? So far it has been able to maintain its neutral stance, but anything it does now, any circular it brings, right? Will its implementation be first on BHIM before others? Will they have any kind of a heads up? I mean, they obviously know what's going to come, right? Like I saw PhonePe roll out some biometric authentication a month ago, and now BHIM has it within a month. So those kind of things. Can it really be a neutral player when it has its own payments app in the running and aiming for a 5% market share?
I'll
Another
get to
thing
that.
that reminds me of one thing.
Yes,
I'll
go on.
just very briefly, when we used to meet with the NPCI and they would offer a new feature, we would read through the spec doc and figure out how we would build it. And at some point, an engineer would come to us and ask us, "Has BHIM built this?" And if our answer was yes, the engineering team was immediately relaxed, and they would be like, "Arey, they haven't built on their own app, man. They haven't figured it out." So it was actually designated expectation for NPCI to build the feature on BHIM first. And now if they do that and BHIM is going hard, then it almost becomes it's a neutrality you were talking about. Earlier it was the expectation it would be first. Now I wonder if that expectation stands.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think, there were 2 points. I just wanted to finish the cashback point, which is that I think the cashback point, I would say, assuming they have to use cashback for a bit. Let's forget about this other axis. I mean, we'll come to this other axis, actually, what Arundhati also brought up. If they have to use cashback, it has to be a pretty big war chest, right? I don't think they can't
Let me
keep
introduce you to a incentive called the BHIM incentive, which is like 1,500 crore incentive that the government is spending to increase transactions on BHIM, low value transactions, that any transaction less than 2,000 rupees will get a certain incentive. For the merchant, obviously, there's no cost, but to all the ecosystem players, there's a certain amount that trickles. So BHIM will get incentive from the BHIM incentive. I mean, did I make sense there?
No, I got it.
But also NPCI in the financial year 24-25 made an operating revenue of 3,270 crores. And I'm reading this from Google.
Sure.
The not-for-profit entity also achieved a record profit of after tax of rupees 1,552 crores.
Yeah, there are analogies between NPCI and BCCI also, but we'll come to that. I'm just stretching the cricket analogy. But okay, fine. So we established that NPCI has the money, which they do, of course. I don't think that was ever under question. The question was only about will they deploy it, they'll deploy it. Now, I guess we'll come to the last part, which is, I guess, what we have spoken about a few times, which is about creating incentives in such a way that it benefits its own app at the expense of others. Now, of course, you've brought up RuPay a few times, but let's remember that RuPay, I mean, the things that it did on RuPay were essentially to screw over Visa and MasterCard, and let's face it, nobody really is sitting and crying for Visa and MasterCard in India. So that doesn't really matter. I guess so if they say something like which they did, that RuPay credit cards can be used only on UPI, or UPI can use only RuPay credit cards and not any other credit cards. I mean, that's fine, right? Visa and MasterCard can cry a bit, but it's okay. They're not Indian companies. And one could argue the objective of doing it was to pull them down a notch. So are there like axes through which they can do things where you can imagine like a PhonePe or a Google Pay or a Cred or a Navi or the others being a little, this is, again, exactly the point that you said, Arundhati. How could you, as supposedly an independent platform, create this thing to benefit your own?
I think that really is the test now. You're really going to test NPCI and its objectives with this, right? We will see that. I don't want to.
No. I'm not saying whether they will or won't. I'm saying forget about that. I'm just saying that if they had to, hypothetically, I'm saying do they even have like how, like what kind of what are the tools at their disposal to do it? Is what I'm asking.
Features, right? Like rolling them out before. Like if it says that UPI Lite is only available on BHIM and nowhere else, for instance, can it do that? It can, but will it? I guess not, right? But there was this other feature, right, Abhishek? The hashtag 99 meant for transferring payments on feature phones, which no one else pushed. But right. NPCI did, right? I mean, I'm digressing a little here, but there were features that it kind of made, it took it upon itself to kind of propagate, right? So it has various levers, I'd reckon, to push BHIM if it wants to, which is why it'll end up being a test for NPCI on whether it can maintain neutrality and at the same time push BHIM for the purposes that we discussed earlier.
I think that feature was terrible, by the way, the 99 one. And it had like huge security holes. So everyone was very wary about using it. I think, I don't think the small players worry BHIM. I don't think a Navi or a Super Money or a Cred worry BHIM.
I agree.
Because...
or reverse, they are not worried of BHIM. They're not worried of BHIM.
I think they will worry about BHIM.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of those people have spent their war chest. A lot of those people are in the consolidation phase where they've been a overvalued fintech for 5 years or 8 years or 10 years.
Correct.
And they're finding their profitability, or they're finding their, EBITDA positivity or whatever it might be.
Adjusted EBITDA positivity.
Sorry?
Adjusted EBITDA positivity.
Yeah, sure. Adjusted EBITDA after ESOP.
Yeah.
I think like BHIM won't worry about them because BHIM will probably say, hey, I tried. I gave you everything to do this. You couldn't do it. So now it's time for me to come and do it.
Correct.
The problem will start with the big players. Because if you see BHIM becoming number 5 or number 4, and even if there's a hint of foul play, the big two are going to be really watching them like hawks. Because they'll be like, we've made this ecosystem.
Correct.
And now you want to traipse in here and, do things that we don't approve of. I am watching you. And the thing is, I have leverage. I have 50% of this market, 40%, 30% of this market. In one of the players is 50% of both the merchant and the consumer markets. So, right. So they have real leverage to scare BHIM. So I think BHIM is scared of the big cats and the small cats are afraid of BHIM. I think that's how it will play out. I would be very surprised if they hold back features for 2 reasons. One, it's very poor signaling. And 2, if features made better products, then no one would buy iPhones.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. What is this feature you're going to launch on UPI that suddenly is going to change the game? I don't see that.
I agree. I don't think, and like this, I would tell my business teams also that we have less revenue, not because of the product guy, but because of the business guy.
Spoken like a true product guy. But okay, go on. Go on.
Today, if we were talking about what really will be BHIM's positioning, right, some time ago. Today, if BHIM came and said that I'm just payments and nothing else, I think it would attract a lot of users because some of us just want payments. We don't want anything else, right?
True.
I think that is BHIM's positioning. If that it made that its plank, it'll get its metro users, it'll get everybody else. And Abhishek, you're right that the top players are probably watching them like hawks, and they have 50% market share. But don't you think that market share can easily be taken away just as they got it? Because It's interoperable. There are banks. Ultimately, it's the banks which are NPCI shareholders, which now are promoting BHIM. Right? If NPCI really was interested in this, and if you're talking about leverage, I would argue that NPCI has a lot of leverage too here.
Arundhati, if I believed in that, I would have started a UPI company. Like, right? Because I could recite UPI circulars like Hanuman Chalisa. Right now, I can't recite either. But I was extremely intimately aware of how the electrons move. But I chose not to start it because I think the consumer play is the hardest. It's the hardest. It's the Apple Samsung problem. It's the whatever Gmail problem. It's the MacBook Windows laptop problem. I think PhonePe and Google Pay have done a fantastic job of whatever they've done. I think it's hard to move the needle against them.
Yeah.
And if I was a betting man, I would buy PhonePe shares on IPO. Yes, 100%.
This is not an investment podcast. Okay, again, I must stress this. I have put too many caveats today. No, I will just end by basically saying this, which is that I think that the real weapon, if you want to call it a weapon, in the hands of NPCI, etc., is that now it has a distribution network, or it has access to a distribution network through which it will promote BHIM, right? Of course, it'll do cashbacks, etc. But if you look at, say, hypothetically, if you look at, say, even like, say, what's the one where the bank accounts thing, Jan Dhan Yojana, right? I mean, like, how hard is it now to essentially say that, look, in post offices across, all of these PIN codes, in all of these places that you said, if you want to like receive, say, pension payments, if you want to like make bill payments, if you want to do all of those things, you can now install BHIM QR codes over there. So fundamentally, you're trying to get like a market share in places where, and through creating use cases, just like how they created bank accounts in order to create use cases, you use this also to create use cases. Same thing. Why did the Jan Dhan Yojana work? Because banks were like, there's no way we can go and sell. These are also unbanked, but it's not worth our time and effort to go and get to these people. That's why that worked, right? At least it worked to the extent that they got bank accounts open. So I feel like that's the axis through which this will go. And seen through that lens, yes. And that is something that, is the best of worlds for everybody, where a Google Pay or a PhonePe are not going to be upset about it. They'll be like, sure, you want these users, please go for it, be my guest. I think the BHIM also gets what they want because they wanted the users, they wanted to expand, they got it. They didn't have to spend, hopefully, tons of cashback in order to get there. I don't know, I feel like that's the play at the end of the day.
Yeah, that will be the most unobtrusive play.
Cool.
I have one last point before we close from my notes.
Yes, go for it.
Rahul, you mentioned how BHIM looks like any other payments app. Last time when we were speaking, we discussed the PhonePe design, which was at that point the PhonePe redesign. And I had predicted that it would just look like any other app in a year. And now we are here a year later and PhonePe looks like any other app.
In fact, I'll maybe push that analogy whereby basically I was telling this to someone recently. I was saying that the PhonePe redesign has become so much like everyone else to the point that if you open Swiggy's home screen looks exactly like, or not very far off from PhonePe's home screen. It's the same bento box design. So I was like, see, this is where design has sort of like collapsed, where a food delivery app and a payments app look exactly the same at first glance.
Yeah.
And the cost of doing it, right? Like PhonePe's employee expenses are like 4,000 crore. NPCI's employee expenses like 400 crore. So I just want to leave you with that.
All right. Good statistic. Thank you so much, Arundhati, Abhishek, Rahel. It's been a fun episode.
Yes, this was fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 2x2. This episode was produced by Uddantika Kashyap and mixed by resident sound engineer Rajiv CN. If you feel there's something we've missed out in this discussion or feel some numbers or facts don't add up, you can write to us at 2bytwo@theken.com. And if you're listening to this episode on Apple Podcasts, please show us some love by leaving us a rating. Lastly, if you love the episode, share it with people, your friends, family, or colleagues who might find it insightful as well. We'll be back next week with an exciting discussion and a 2x2 for you to think about.